The Gathering for Justice believes in an organizing model which draws from diverse communities and utilizes our combined power to build the agenda for sustained Black and Brown liberation.
Our most transformative initiatives happen at the intersections of cultural organizing, convening people across generations and differences, organizing smart, rapid response initiatives to breaking events, and effectively organizing advocacy efforts for policy change.
We convene people across generations and cultural differences, and we make sure that those who are directly impacted by the issues are at the center of what we do.
Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for bringing your stories into this space.
The Gathering for Justice is intentional about coalition building. Whether it's bringing on 50 partners in one weekend to free my brother Pedro Hernandez, or 500 partners to join the 2017 Women's March on Washington and mobilize over 5 million globally.
I am truly humbled to join and serve you as one of the national co-chairs of the Women's March, alongside my sistren, Tamika Mallory, Linda Sarsour, and Bob Bland.
We believe that power comes from taking care of people, not just in the work, but also in their joy and wellness.
Art and culture infuses our organizing work with emotional power and cultural resonance. The Gathering for Justice builds long-term relationships with artists, musicians, actors, athletes, and cultural tastemakers to bring them into the movement. Going deeper than publicity, we provide historical grounding and pathways to strengthen the natural activist core of their work.
I'm here because you called. I'm here because I am part of your history.
We've led campaigns to free Meek Mill.
Free who? Free! Free who? Free! Free who? When they free Meek, they free me, right?
We've led campaigns to take a knee with Colin Kaepernick.
The blackballing of Colin Kaepernick is essentially the blackballing of our people.
In actuality, we know that community-based organizations are the best ones to resolve conflict.
And Imagine Justice with Common, just to name a few.
The Gathering for Justice has built a robust rapid response network via our state-based organizing task forces.
If we don't get it,
Justice League NYC
stand here for justice.
and Justice League California.
Shame on you, Governor Newsom!
We believe that those closest to the problems are closest to the solution.
No peace!
We support them in their leadership.
No peace! No peace!
Now!
What do we want?
Raise the aid!
When do we want it?
Now!
If we don't get it, shut it down! If you don't get it, shut it down! Shut it down! Shut it down!
Our rapid response work is tied to clear policy demands, which helps leverage public attention for tangible change.
The power to make a big change must include public education. The Gathering for Justice has 2 long-running programs, Revolutionary Reels and Radical Readz, that feature movies and books that ground our audience in historical wisdom and create entry points into current advocacy efforts.
I am so deeply honored and humbled.
We leverage people power and channel public attention into tangible changes that elected officials can make, building power with an inside-outside approach that wins clear policy victories.
The Gathering for Justice is the beloved community grounded in dignity, love, justice, and collective liberation.
We are the what? We are the what? We are the what that movement! We are the what? We are the what? We are the what that movement! We are the what? We are the what? We are the what that movement!
whenever a building is constructed, you usually have an architect who draws a blueprint. And that blueprint serves as the pattern, as the guide, as the model for those who are to build the building. And a building is not well erected without a good, sound, and solid blueprint.
So without further ado, Mr. Mayor Jon Sternfeld.
Inspires me as our state's chief attorney and law enforcement officer to do more to fight alongside you for justice.
What's up, Oxnard? This is Jaden, and I want to welcome you all to the MLK Freedom and Unity Weekend.
One of the most important things we can do is empower you all as young people, as youth leaders, to use your voices and to walk in the direction that you feel is strongest. Each one of us will find our role and find our lane and get in, as they say, where we fit in.
It started with a vision to keep the kids out of prison, so he convened the youth and then they begin on the mission to find the agenda and change the current conditions in the spirit of King. So we moving in that tradition. The movement is of conviction, righteousness and truth. We fighting for what's right to improve the life of the youth. Still the coppers and shoot unarmed men with their hands up. It's time for all the women and all the men to stand up for justice and become a part of the league. I know that we gon' win. I swear to God, I believe that we gon' be free. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I'ma keep fighting with every breath that I breathe. I believe. I believe. I believe. I believe. I believe. I believe. Do you believe? I believe. I believe. Do you believe? I believe that we will win. I believe. I believe. I believe. Do you believe? I believe. I believe. 'Cause I believe. I believe. I believe. Do you believe? I believe that we will win. Be patient, they say, while they see our children carried away. Be patient, they say. They murder us with our hands up.
Now is a time of change, a time of new generational growth and development within our community. So we come together in unity and in love, and we support one another, because closed mouths, say this when I say this, closed mouths don't get fed.
Helping all of you really in the community, you know, I enjoy doing what I do. And I plan to continue to do what I do for as long as I can.
I believe in myself. Yo creo en mí mismo, peleando el egoísmo, migración y terrorismo. Esto es la nueva revolución, representando la unión.
With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state in every city. We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Happy birthday, Mr. Harry Belafonte. You know you've delighted the hearts of people all over the world throughout your acclaimed career. You know how much I love and admire and adore you. And I gotta say, one of the highlights of this past year was singing and dancing to Deo, Deo in the kitchen, and having you reach out to me afterwards about it. So I just cherish you and I celebrate your 94 incredible years here on Earth. There wouldn't be a path forward for me had you not helped to make it. And so my heart, my soul, all of me says thank you for being you all these years. Happy 94th.
This is your side right here? Okay. Just get on my side. Just want to make sure. So good evening. My name is Carmen Perez Jordan. I'm the president and CEO of the Gathering for Justice. I'd like to welcome you to the Harry Belafonte Center and the Gathering for Justice offices, and also to this very special radical Readz. Many of you know or don't know that the Gathering was founded in 2005 by the legendary late Harry Belafonte, who was an artist and an activist and a civil rights leader who became our ancestor just a few months ago and who we miss dearly. Mr. B's mission for the Gathering for Justice was to build a national movement to end child incarceration and eliminate the racial inequities that permeate the justice system. We are now in our 19th year of operation, and I am really proud to say that the Gathering has grown significantly over the past 2 decades. I'm really excited about this Radical Readz, one of our most popular programs, which was inspired by Mr. Belafonte's idea for a sustained radical book club for young movement leaders. While we paused some of our live events during the pandemic, we've been very proud to host in-person and online author events over the last few years. People like Sean King, our sister Tamika D. Mallory, our other sister Linda Sarsour, Julissa Adse, Marlon Peterson, Paula Mendoza, our brother Maisan Linen, who is here with us tonight, Mark Lamont Hill, Yusuf Salam, and more. Tonight's Radical Readz is a very special one for us here because we're featuring our dear friend and our partner, former Lieutenant Raymond, Edwin Raymond of the NYPD, and NYPD 12. We'll get to that later, but come have a seat. Before we get started, let me share a little bit about former Lieutenant Raymond. So what can I call you? Like Edwin? Because this is Edwin? Isn't that weird? It feels weird.
Listen,
I used to call you all these other names, but Edwin was not one of them.
Edwin is fun.
Okay. All right, so I don't want to read his entire bio or his history from the NYPD, but because we'll be talking about that later, here's a little piece about Edwin from his book press. Over his decade and a half with the New York Police Department, Edwin Raymond consistently exposed the dark underbelly of modern policing, becoming the highest-ranking whistleblower in the history of force and one of the country's leading voices against police injustice, offering a rare and often shocking view of American policing. An Inconvenient Cop pulls back the curtain on the many flaws woven into the NYPD's training, data, and practices, which have since been repackaged and repurposed by police departments across the country. An Inconvenient Cop courageously bears witness to and exposes institutional violence. It presents a vision of radical hope and makes the case for a world in which the police's responsibility is not to arrest numbers, but to the actual people. Please, again, welcome Edwin Raymond. I'm going to start with just a really quick question. So there's a lot of questions here, but I want to start with one that actually tells the story about how you and I met. And so if we could get into that a little bit, because I think that'll set the tone for this conversation.
Yeah, so, and I write about this in the book. I was with my good friend and brother, Jim St. Germain. I had accompanied him to Washington, D.C. for President Obama's task force, 21st Century Policing Task Force. And there were different panelists coming, different categories of panelists. And then I believe Jim and Carmen were on the same panel together as community advocates, and I was blown away. I prior to that, I hadn't heard of Carmen, and I said, I gotta get in touch with them, because I knew at that time specifically, I didn't know I was going to be a whistleblower a year later, but I knew I was ready to get involved. And I said, if I could find, young activists to do it with, that's an angle that the system isn't ready for. Because think about it, at the time, Justice League NYC was protesting cops and issues with cops. So to stand shoulder to shoulder is something that the system wouldn't even know how to respond to. So that's when it was a little hard to get in touch with you at first.
Oh man, wait. Let me tell the story. After my session, he came up to me and I was like, oh my God, I hope no one sees me shaking hands with a police officer. I was so scared. When you do police accountability work, you can't really be. And I think that was kind of like the reason why it was hard to get a hold of us, was because it compromised our ability to hold police accountable, not knowing that you were actually on our side. And we got a lot of pushback. A lot of community activists and other community organizations were saying that we were in bed with the police and all these different things. And so I appreciate you telling that story, because I remember I was like, so.
It was different.
It was different. And I was
shout out to Angelo Pinto.
Yes,
he's the one that was like, no, you guys have to sit with him, because when I knew the Times article was going to come out, and the Times article had a lot of the secret recordings that I did of the higher ups. Angelo, and I write about all of this. Angelo and I, we met up. We sat in the car in Chinatown. It was cold. I had the heat blasting. And for 2 hours, we listened to the recordings. And he was just like, oh, no, I got to talk to Carmen and Tamika. You know, and then, you know, at the previous headquarters, we had that initial meeting. And, you know, you guys have been here ever since. And I thank you for it. I know it's not easy. I know it's such an anomaly. Like, I see the comments, you know, from my son's page, your page, Tamika, Sean King. I see the comments. You know, I've seen them over the years. There was one gentleman who I'm not going to name who had very negative things to say about you guys, who's from Flatbush, that I had to approach, and he had nothing to say. You know, he said, "Well, we didn't know you were that kind of cop. You know, we just seen they standing with the cops now, so you know we didn't trust that guidance."
And I think oftentimes we forget that you actually come from. You may have the same experience that we had with police officers. You may have grown up in the same neighborhoods that we come up. And so let's go down that lane. Let's go back to memory lane of why did you want to become a police officer? What inspired you? So just tell us a little bit about yourself in that journey.
Sure. So, you know, born and raised and still living in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. My parents migrated from Haiti in the 70s and 80s. And, you know, my mother died when I was only 3. You know, it was, and that essentially was the beginning of a very difficult childhood. My dad didn't speak English. It's part of the reason why I speak Creole, because I had to translate for him. And you know, this is the crack epidemic. This is when it was much rougher in New York. I was around. I was swimming. I was all in it, but I wasn't. Right. So the friends that I grew up with, when the streets started, when they started getting into the streets, you know, they were still my friends. But thankfully, I avoided a lot of the behavior. I wasn't perfect, obviously, but around 15, it didn't stop the cops from tossing me on the wall the same way. You know, and after about 3 years of going through this, one particular day I was like, I need to understand why this keeps happening. If there was a Dominican cop, a black cop, that treated me the same way. Prior to that, all the cops had always been white. So I was under the impression this is just racism, individual bigotry. So when the cop was black, I couldn't digest it. So I said, I'm going to join. I'm going to see why this happens, why they can't tell the difference between me and, you know, some of the other folks that might be involved in the streets more. And at 22, I joined the police department.
Wow. I mean, imagine that. 22 years old, you're still a baby, you know, and there's still so much to learn. At its best, what do you think, or what did you think policing meant to public safety?
I mean, listen, we have challenges in our communities, right? And policing is supposed to be a public good, a tax-funded public good, just like any other department in the city. But because of the origins of policing, as well as the fact that the police are the muscle of the system, right? Police enforce laws, but most importantly, police reflect basically the culture of the society. And we have a lot of racism embedded in the culture. So unfortunately, depending on where you fall on the scale in terms of demographic, you're going to get a very different experience with police. You understand? But what police should be, ideally, is one of the first pillars of public safety, ideally. And there are people that's what they get. But there are obviously other people in the city that get a very different experience.
When was that first brought to light? When you realized, look, I want to go into this institution. I want to make a difference. I want to figure out why this is happening, right? You had experienced police misconduct in your own life. At what point did you realize that you actually couldn't change the system? I mean, or did you ever realize that? Or am I just, I don't want to.
No, I got you. So my miscalculation was, I was under the impression that because I was now so-called blue, that if it came from me, that it would come, you know, they would actually be receptive to it. Because immediately in the police academy, the us versus them was clear. And if you don't run towards the gunfire, if you don't put on the uniform, they don't care, especially if you want to criticize, they're not even hearing you. I'm running towards the gunfire too. I have the uniform also. So I was under the impression at 22 that because I wear the uniform, and I do the job, if the criticism is coming from me, it's going to be more respected. And then that's when I learned the system operates the way it operates. It's very stubborn, it's well oiled, and it will steamroll anyone that gets in it. It will try to steamroll anyone that gets in the way. So that's an adjustment that I had to make.
Did any other police officers ever confide in you prior to your realization? Did any other police officers confide in you about what was happening, or was it just something you didn't talk about? Y'all did your job, and then you went home, and it was the same thing the next day.
So I went into the academy kicking down the door. Day one, like there's a lot of cops, conservatives especially, who don't agree with my politics. But one thing that they say is he's no gimmick. Since day one in the academy, this is who he was. So prior to ever speaking out publicly, I spoke out internally. And when I would do that, cops would come up and say, listen, I agree. And I have to say this, like, one of the things I never expected was the amount of white officers that also understood. I never expected that. I'm thinking, you're from Ronkonkoma, you're from Suffolk County, you don't know my reality, you don't understand. But what I learned, and I'm glad that I'm in a position to stand firm, when you connect on a human level, you can understand other people's pain, other people's suffering. And like, for instance, 511, which is NYPD code for suspended license. Since I was 7 years old, I've been watching people get arrested for suspended license. An older white cop was absolutely shocked that we arrested for that. He said, in Nassau, it's a summons. I said, really? I said, tell me more. And then, we would chop it up every day, and I would just get a better understanding of how policing, it's the same state laws, but they're being enforced completely different, and the only reason is because of the demographics of who's getting enforced.
Wow. Tell us how you first became aware that the quotas being forced on young beat officers like yourself were problematic or systemically racist in nature.
Yeah. So day one so one thing I was shocked about in the academy was, from the academy, I couldn't tell why we were experiencing the policing. The academy, the language is very careful. What makes the manual. So I was still left scratching my head like, wait, after 6 months, I'm still not getting, I know what I've been through. I know what we all go through. I went to the High School of Art and Design, so the students there are from all over the city. I would sit at the cafeteria, and whether you were from the Bronx, Harlem, Jamaica, Queens, Stapleton, we all got the same treatment, on the weekends. And day one, after the academy, we got the quotas, 4, 10, and 10. The quotas exist in a trifecta. 4 arrests, 10 tickets, and 10 stopping friends. And at first I'm like, maybe they want us to get this so that when it happens organically, we'll know how to do the paperwork, we'll know how to take police action. But listen, I was 22, man. I was 22, But then immediately what I saw was, it was relentless. That's all that mattered to the lieutenant. That's all that mattered to the captain, all the way up to the chief, to the mayor's office. And then when I realized we were a citywide unit, but we were only ever put, I was part of the Brooklyn branch. We were only ever put in the hood, in Flatbush, definitely in Brownsville, in Bed-Stuy. And I'm like, wait, if we're a citywide unit and people are jumping the turnstile everywhere, why are we only put in these areas? So that's when I saw the systemic racism aspect of it. But then, on a rare occasion, somebody brought in a white person. The lieutenant took you to the back and had a conversation with you. And the question is, why are you going for soft targets? Yeah.
Wait.
Listen.
The lieutenant's ethnic background was what?
He was Italian.
Italian.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why are you going for soft targets? So that's when I was like, oh, so this is, it's pretty obvious. It's hyper-focused on Blacks and Latinos because just the areas that they want us to focus this so-called enforcement activity on. And that's what I was like. And then the third part, I watched my peers who I knew from the academy who weren't terrible people. I watched who they became. Even my own partner, I love her to death to this day, but I had to pull her aside like, what was that? She was like, oh, I'm going on vacation, so I'm trying to get it out the way. Which means So if the quota,
it's like Hunger Games, you know what I'm saying? It's like, yo, we got to get this in order for us to live.
Exactly.
Like y'all were like really trying to survive in this institution that was going to take you out. If you didn't really meet these, that's crazy.
Yeah, and that's the part I was like, wow. So it made me replay a lot of my own police encounters. And then one day I actually ran into a cop that was a terror on my block. And at first he didn't recognize me. Right? He looked at my name tag. Oh, Raymond. I'm like, you don't even know who I am. I said, Newkirk and 25th. And then it hit him. He was like, from the Twin Slums, right? How you gonna call my building Twin Slums? He was like, from the Twin Slums. And then he explained, now you see what the job is, right? You see the way we were. It's because I said, but you don't have to be that way. But then, it was an uphill battle.
When you say you don't have to be that way, I mean, from what I'm hearing, you have this trifecta that you have to meet. You have these people that are above you. You have an academy. You have everything that is telling you actually do have to be that way. So how do you exist trying to not be that?
So the irony about the quotas is they're illegal. And that was my foundation. What you're asking of me is unlawful. We're supposed to be the cops. We're supposed to be the ones enforcing the law. Why are we breaking the law? And that was always going to be my defense. Again, they still try to take my head off, but that was always going to be the defense.
All right, well, we have some folks that are going to be sharing some readings because this book is so powerful and you did a great job of putting us in your shoes. The struggle between you wanting to contribute and what the system was forcing you to do is very raw. I want us to keep talking, but I also think the audience would like to hear a little bit from the book. And so we've invited some friends who are all here with us who are going to read a short excerpt from just the introduction of An Inconvenient Cop. So please welcome, I'm going to call everyone up, Mr. Michael Blake. Woo! Stanley Fritz. And then we have a special guest after. All right, take it away.
No role in society is more divisive than that of a cop. Feared and respected, insulted and embraced, viewed as both the glue keeping it all together and the force breaking it all apart. The heart of our civilization and the soul of its disruption. He is both the uniter and the divider, torn by allegiances, recognizes the cure and the disease itself. The police officer occupies a central role in our society, but he's pulled in two different directions by the people he essentially serves and the system that provides for him. He can't serve both. If he's true to himself and to his job, his center cannot hold. I wake up every morning feeling this tension in my bones. These days, a black cop may seem oxymoronic like that Jean-Michel Basquiat painting Irony of the Negro Policeman. The painting captures the conflict, the reality of the limbo that I'm in. The irony of being in the receiving end of oppression while donning the uniform of the oppressor. Basquiat himself was that downtown graffiti artist of Haitian descent whose provocative and renegade genius was embraced but then commodified by the uptown elite. He knew from ironies. The double life of someone who sees himself one way and is seen by the public in another. I'm a police officer, but it's not my identity. I'm a man who became a cop. At one time, I saw becoming a police officer as a way to serve my community, but when I got into the uniform, I got to look at things from the inside. I saw something that I couldn't ignore. Despite my aspirations and inspirations, I wasn't in a position to fix anything. In trying to rectify the issues, I was mocked, insulted, gaslit, elbowed, aside, set up, lied about, retaliated against, and treated as the problem.
There are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the country.
because of New York City's claim as this country's safest big city and influence across the nation. Its policing model has been packaged, marketed, and sold across the United States and even to cities overseas. The police force is not a benevolent, well-meaning, but merely misunderstood institution. The brass will insist it is unfairly treated. They will claim its reputation has been tainted by so-called bad apples. This is a convenient fiction maintained to insulate the leadership and the department itself from criticism. The academy churns our cops who are indoctrinated in the myth of heroic policemen. This is especially true for the vaunted NYPD. His selfless courage and honor, his central role as a protector of public safety, his precarious presence as a dam, preventing the rushing wave of crime from engulfing us all. The thin blue line keeping us from chaos. Under the banner of public safety, the police force incentivizes its officers to maintain the racial and social order. They are the most visible organization tasked with America's subjugation of its minority citizens. Cops who won't engage in this behavior, who want to be valuable contributors to the neighborhood, who want to help the community instead of harass it, are kept knocking around the bottom where they cannot threaten it. The institution has a violent, visceral reaction like a gag reflex to anyone who resists the program. These problem cops often get chewed up and spit out. That's what usually happens. That's what the institution's defenses are trained to do. But he didn't plan for someone like me.
In 2014, Eric Garner died from a banned police chokehold after being suspected of selling loose cigarettes. 6 years later, George Floyd was suffocated to death after allegedly passing a counterfeit $20 bill. Elijah McClain, Philando Castile, Walter Scott, Terrence Crutcher, Tamir Rice, Tyree Nichols. When we speak of the police who killed these innocent people, we're not talking about bad apples anymore. It's time we start talking about the barrel, or even further back in its creation, what I call the soil. Police reform has been on the public agenda for years, but well-meaning activists, politicians, and experts keep missing the big picture. They're focused on accountability for the individual officer when things go terribly wrong. These incidents are tragedies, but nothing about them, from the initial encounter to the fatal initial decision, happens in a vacuum. We need to bring change to the day-to-day police behavior that is ravaging communities. We must root out the rank-and-file harassment that doesn't appear on the news, but that most men, women, and even children of color can tell you stories about. The persecution of citizens of color spreads like a toxin through my city, through every city. By the time someone ends up dead, that's just the final breath, the last gasp of air. We have to focus on the meticulous and deliberate poisoning of the soil. What are cops being taught? How are they rewarded for policing? Which type of officer is getting ahead and which is passed over? Cops are created by a system, function in a system, and are rewarded by a system that sees Black men as threats. Harassing men of color is not an offshoot of the job or a side effect of the job. It is the job.
I experienced this treatment as a Black teenager in East Flatbush, Brooklyn, and I've seen it throughout my nearly 15 years on the force. The police, as they currently behave, are not doing the best they can to solve the problems they are dealt. In fact, they are at the root of the problem itself. Through racist, unlawful quotas and its harassments of residents of color for low-level offenses, the NYPD raises revenue for the city and salaries for itself on the backs of Black and brown residents. Citizens' lives are being squeezed in a modernized convict lease system. Today's police force is the kin of the slave patrols of the 19th century and the Black codes of the Jim Crow South. Anyone who knows their history understands that it is no exaggeration to draw a straight line from there to here. The NYPD model has been packaged and sold by politicians, top cops in New York, and have made millions off of it. The policing born in New York City continues to spread like poison through America's cities. Until we get a groundswell of police, public servants, activists, and civically minded residents pushing this issue, we will never be able to address the damage it has done and continues to do. A police officer's job is to address certain conditions by protecting, facilitating, and sometimes enforcing things in his community. But focusing on enforcement to the exception of all else is like a teacher whose only job is to flunk students. As an incentive to keep his job, to advance in his job, he begins to look only for reasons to fail them. Pretty soon, that's all he sees. Even if it's against his better judgment, that's what he's paid to see. So he adapts accordingly. A cop who does this isn't a bad apple. According to the structures of the system, he's exactly the kind of apple they're trying to grow.
All the best intentioned efforts to get cops to stop policing this way are futile, because they think this is what policing is. From the rank and file all the way to the top, this is the job to them. They don't see the larger harm they're doing to communities by throwing people into the system because of their skin color, because of their address. Cops don't even realize they're doing it for those reasons. They've convinced themselves they're increasing public safety. Petty arrests, bread and butter of the NYPD and departments across the country, further disenfranchise the already marginalized. Arrests follow people throughout their lives, pushing them away from mainstream society. Once they enter the system, their job prospects, housing opportunities, finances, relationships, and family security are irrevocably affected. From what we know about how disenfranchisement leads people into illicit activity and how prison encourages criminal behavior, the conclusion smacks us in the face. Police are at the heart of the very problem they are supposedly trying to solve. And it's been upside down like this for so long, no one knows any other way. Not the chiefs in power who were brought up in this system, or the new recruits being churned out every 6 months who get inculcated in it. They are all blind to the damage because it reads to them as success. But I see it. Everywhere I turn, I see it. And before becoming a cop, I knew it from the other side of that line. I lived it.
As a child of immigrant parents in the poor black neighborhood of East Flatbush, born in the 80s and coming of age in the 90s, I regularly dealt with aggressive policing. Over time, I felt the effect it had on me, my friends, and my community. I saw how it increased the very crime it was ostensibly looking to stop by marginalizing people for the smallest things. I recognized how it severed any potential bridges between the neighborhood and police. Cooperation between communities and police would serve both parties, but the negative cycle runs on its own momentum, and no one on the inside wants to gum up the works. I lived idealistically, but not naive. I became a police officer at 22 in an effort to try to right the wrongs the criminal justice system imposes on members of my community. I opted to be the kind of cop who could help, support, and lift up my people. I assumed that all it took for me to police this way was the desire to do so. I could not have been more wrong. I have faced harassment, threats, isolation, and punishment in service of that mission. But all of that led me to believe I'm on to something. It made me dig in my heels more firmly. While writing this book, I was the highest ranking active whistleblower in the history of the NYPD. Sickened by what I had seen, by what the police force thinks is job, I won't participate in it. I refuse to quietly bear witness.
When I began to speak out against racially motivated quotas and harassment policing, retaliation came swift and direct. First with my assignments, then by being passed over for promotions, even though I was more than qualified with test scores in the highest percentile. Then I was set up by fellow cops while I bell about being prepared in the news media. Prior to going public, I sought out the other whistleblowers and joined 11 fellow officers in a civil suit against the police department and the city of New York for pushing illegal quotas and punishing officers of color who refused to participate. I became the face of the NYPD 12 lawsuit, got put on the cover of the New York Times Magazine, was featured in the award-winning film Crime and Punishment, and stood with activists such as Colin Kaepernick, all of which brought me even more threats and retaliation.
Growing up in poverty, losing a parent at a very young age, and watching the others slip away, I have known suffering too intimately to stand down. So I kept fighting, even as the threats grew worse. Frank Cervical, the most famous whistleblower in police history, who has become a confidant of mine, says that his father once told him, "Never run when you're right." I know that if the soil is prepared properly, the right seeds planted and allowed to grow high into the ranks of the department, then the same power that has made the police force such a poison can be the source of positive change. What's missing in today's conversation about police are justice-minded officers who sensibly stake out the middle ground, who work within the system yet are still able to see its faults. Police who are blinded by tribalism. Due to their unique position, they should be a part of any decisions made to remedy issues within the criminal justice system. We exist. We push our way to the front and then lay ourselves down. Not because we are giving up, but because we are the bridge.
So I just want to share with all of you that Felicia Riley is also a member of the NYPD 12. And her words, reading Edwin's words, it was so familiar when we were actually meeting with y'all. A lot of what you read happened to you as well. But thank you all so much.
Thank you, seriously.
Thank you.
So I've been a reader for Sean King's book, as well as Yusuf's. And wow, to watch that for my book was insane. So I appreciate you all for sharing that moment.
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
The words, the way you write them are so digestible. They're so relatable. We met in DC, but also 8 years ago. That was pre-babies and pre-husband. Oh my God, that's when we were really out in the streets. But after the New York Times Sunday magazine published the article about you, I believe it was Angelo who brought us all together. You had already talked about that. Tell us how the 12 of you came together. Like I said, it's great to have you, Felicia. I think Felicia was probably the only woman that was part of the NYPD 12. So major props to you for standing up. I know that for you, a lot of times you were also not being covered when you were on your shifts. But how did you all come together? Take us through that journey. How did it start?
So I had a mentor who was a captain, and it was a breath of fresh air because I was under the impression that once they reach that rank, the only way to get promoted is to play the numbers game. But this particular gentleman didn't care about the numbers game. And when I came to him with the issues, Jim also connected me to him. We stayed in touch on the subject. And one day he called me and he said, a couple of cops are going to have a press conference about quotas in front of one of Police Plaza, NYPD headquarters. You should check it out. So I threw on a suit and I checked it out. And it was about 4 of them who were part of the lawsuit at the time. And that's when I met the attorneys. And I said, I got some ammo I could give to this, bring to this fight. After I met with the attorneys, they made a decision to have me as the face, as the lead plaintiff. And it was on from there. It would still take about a year before we all met. Prior to going to Sarah Wallace on NBC, we met up at a pub near NBC Studios. And that's when, because I'd read their names on the lawsuit, but that's when I started putting faces to names. And I remember Felicia was quiet as a mouse, just observing everyone in the room.
She still is.
Still is. She's the type, she'll sit in the corner and just watch everyone and see whose spirit, takes her, as she says. But yeah, I remember that day, and then that's been my sister ever since. It's been a fight. Last summer, unfortunately, I don't know if that's one of the questions, but it took 7 years later. This is when the judge dismisses most of the cases. We refiled in state court, and that's where we're at now. But it's like 7 years, and the judge's opinion didn't make sense. because she would say, while this disturbed me, it didn't reach the level of, and I'm like, you're disturbed because it did reach the level.
Right, clearly.
You wouldn't be disturbed if it didn't. But look at what happened to the judge in the stop and frisk case. They destroyed her career. It was, it's not easy to make these decisions. They said she was biased. They removed her from the federal monitor, and I'm glad she made the decision she made, but it destroyed her career afterwards.
When I think about the journey that you all have been on, there's been a lot at stake, and I know that somebody had read a little bit about that. But what's changed? You are no longer with the department. You've had a lot of officers reach out to you. But what's at stake?
So, and it kills me because the police leadership, they like to take credit for things that they fought against, right? Because of the work of Justice League, because of the work of Gathering, because of the work of the activists, the elected officials, the whistleblowers, we started getting change. We went from nearly 700,000 stop and frisk in 2011 to less than 46,000 in 2014. That's the work working. We went from summonses for bike on sidewalk, open container, and every cop had to get, if you worked in the hood, you had to get $25 a month, to decriminalizing those offenses to oath summonses, right? Where it's civil, we first, the late Ken Thompson changed the classification, changed how marijuana was enforced, saying he would not prosecute less than 25 grams. And today we have, it's actual legalization of cannabis. So that's the work working. So I get the cynicism, right? Because despite the work working, we still end up with Tyree Nichols. After Eric Garner, after George Floyd, we still end up with Tyree Nichols. Every single person involved in that situation was black. So I can understand the cynicism, but if you pay attention, the work is working. That's just how powerful these systems are. They find ways to evolve, to continue to work, and this is why we can't stop. We deserve our breaks. We deserve to live our lives. One of the most amazing things is watching you be a wife and a mother. So we deserve that. We deserve it. Tamika's enjoying being a grandmother. Right? We deserve that. But at the same time, we are the folks in society who have chosen to sacrifice so much, because if we're successful, and we have been at times, millions of people benefit.
Yes.
It's an honor to carry that burden.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what's next? You wrote a book. I mean, there's going to be the Netflix series. Right. I know there's going to be the major picture. What's next?
Who's going to play you?
Who's going to play you?
Honestly, I'm not going to telegraph all the punches, but over 2,000 cops have reached out over those 8 years, over those 7 years.
Wow.
And, we just did the launch at King's Theater, and there were cops that flew in from all over the country. Wow. One as far as Metropolitan Police in London.
Wow.
All whistleblowers that watched Crime and Punishment thought we were crazy, Felicia. They thought we were crazy. But when they went to work, they couldn't shut up. Something happened from watching the film where they went from thinking we were crazy to taking the same risk themselves. You know what I mean? It's amazing. Steve, listen, Steve, I need you to stand.
Yes, Steve, stand.
Steve May is the reason Crime and Punishment exists. So I think, and I couldn't do this from inside I couldn't write the book from inside the NYPD, and this next mission, I had to be unencumbered by being in the belly of the beast. I needed the autonomy to get this done. So in the coming months, in the 2024, it's going to be an explosive general election year. And obviously we have a lot going on in the Middle East. But let's be honest, one side of the spectrum, it's law and order. Law and order is their talking point. After George Floyd, we cannot have conversations about law and order without conversations about civil rights. And that's where we come in.
That's right.
All right. So just stay tuned. Again, I'm not going to telegraph all the punches. Stay tuned. I'm dedicated to this mission, and I will not let you down.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight for this special Radical Readz, and thank you, Edwin, for allowing us to host this special evening and showcase your exceptional work. If you haven't already purchased an Inconvenient cop, you can do that at the table to the right. I'm going to open it up quickly for questions. Does anybody have any questions for?
Maris, what is your vision for the reader that hasn't read or don't know your story, going forward on your effect of changing what is happening now?
Yeah. So the reader. So it's a memoir. The reader. I'm very vulnerable in this.
Okay, wait. How old are you again? You
just turned 38.
He's 38 and he wrote his memoir. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a sequel to that, right? There's going to be a three-phase. There's got to be, right? The aftermath.
So I'm very transparent about some very difficult. I had to ask my brother, is it okay? I'm going to say things about our childhood that only we know. But it's essential because when people who have read the book, they're like, how did you find the strength? And the strength literally comes from the tough childhood. You understand? I used to question it. I don't even question it anymore. Right? So I take the reader throughout my journey growing up, my decision to become a police officer, the things that I saw, and the things that need to be done to fix it. After you read the book, the back of the book has all the recommendations, just not super detailed, but just enough to get the folks going. So I don't leave folks on a cliffhanger in terms of what could be done, right? So that question is answered. Yeah.
I think recently I saw on CNN, I'm not sure about Elijah McClain, about the officers, and I'm like, that happened so long ago. Yeah. And what I hate is that when he was killed, no one knew who he was. It was only like, that mass shooting that happened compared to what happened to him. So that's what was sad. Everyone knew about the mass shooting, but no one knew about Elijah McClain until George Floyd. And that was just crazy to me. It's like, it was sad. Yeah. That for George Floyd, no one would know because I'm from Rochester. So if you know who got killed in Rochester too, he was before George Floyd too. Yeah, the was before George Floyd too. Yeah. So we had our own protests. I wasn't part of it, but we had our own protests. Well, we had some things. You were?
Yep.
When?
Daniel Crew, I went on behalf of the Gathering Justice League. We were part of the march, and you didn't know about Daniel Crew until after George Floyd was in the middle of the pandemic. But I am proud to say that from the streets to legislation, we did finally get Daniel's Law passed.
That's right.
So that task force is up now in the state legislature.
Yeah, she's dead. She's like the first. I think she's maybe the first Black woman there. And it's just, and then the head chief, he's Black, and the police officer, and like everyone was really, they were really protesting for her.
Let me speak to that. So two things. George Floyd happening. When you think about Eric Garner in 2014, virtually all of the elements of George Floyd were there. But the one thing that wasn't was the pandemic, right? All distractions were suppressed. Everyone had finished watching. There was a Tiger King, or there was nothing else to watch on Netflix. That's right. You couldn't go to a restaurant. There was no sports. No distractions were gone, and that's why we got the reaction that we got for George Floyd and other cases that were essentially probably would have never been known. Thankfully, we're able to get some press. One of the things I write about in the book is cosmetic diversity. True diversity is diversity of thought. Do not let people fool you because of what they look like. These systems are very powerful. And what I found, not to ruin the book, but what I found was, especially minorities in positions of power, they say they believe and they say to themselves, they're just waiting to get more power before they push the button. There's always more power to get. It's infinity. You're never going to reach the position. The time to do right is always now.
That's right. And I know that there's been a reference to Justice League NYC and Justice League California. That is the Gatherings, two state-based task force. It's really our rapid response arm. The Gathering for Justice was founded by Harry Belafonte, and it's really kind of like the connection to the civil rights movement. We used to call ourselves SNCC 2.0. Justice League NYC is our we come together like Voltron, and everybody is welcome to be part of Justice League. You know, everybody has righteous anger, and so we take to the streets with a set of demands grounded in the ideology of Dr. King, which is Kingian nonviolence. And so we've been in the streets for the past, I think it's going to be 14 years. Jules, we've been out in the streets. We were in Ferguson, we were in Flint, and we outside. And we welcome any of you who has a gift. You know, Mr. Belafonte always said, whatever gift you have, bring that to the cause, bring that to the movement. And so we welcome anybody who's interested to have a conversation with us.
First, congratulations. The second, for the shout out in the book. And, you know, it's just such a powerful indictment of the institution, this fundamental functioning. My concern, though, is that the recommendations don't really address the demands from 2020 to get the police out of our lives in as many ways as we possibly can. It's a number of tweaks to the institution of policing. So what are you doing to try to address those demands from the streets?
And this is Professor Alex Vitale, the author of End of Policing. You gotta let folks know.
Yes.
So I was a candidate 2 years ago, right? And a lot of officers who donated to my campaign, they called me, some of them cursing me out. Why are you supporting defunding the police, right? And what I told them was, if you never had to go to a mental health call again, would you be okay with that? Of course. What about a domestic violence call that's not violent? We hate those. You know, and I just went down the list. I said, well, so if we can take a portion of the funds that goes to the NYPD, right? Because cops wear too many hats already, and give it to other city agencies, and maybe even create agencies that don't exist to address these issues. If that had to be done, but a portion of the fund had to be taken, would you be okay with that? Of course. I said that's what I'm supporting. So you're right. In the book, I didn't get too deep into that, but that's essentially where I stand on that. There's several, more than probably any other profession, police work out of title, right? Because if there's not a specific agency to respond, give it to the cops. Let me tell you, as a sergeant, I worked in housing and night shift, you know, and the things I've been called for, it just did, there's one woman couldn't turn off her faucet. Like, what am I doing there? You know, you know, this, like, you kept turning it, the water wouldn't shut off.
Did you ever go to, get a cat out of a tree anytime?
No. But, listen, No. Actually, I got a cat out of the subway.
Oh.
Yeah. I had to jump into the tracks, Church Avenue in the queue, and take the cat. So, yeah. So, when there's no specific... right?
Just curious.
So that's, you know, and let's work together. You know, your work is essential. Yeah. I believe this perspective is essential. Let's work together.
Absolutely.
Let's do an op-ed.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for all that you do. I know him from my former life of being a principal, and the way that I led in the community was to provide wraparound services. There's also a grave injustice taking place in education today as well. So I would definitely like to have an extended conversation with you too. I just recently quoted some reading statistics about the reading scores, the high percentages of Black and brown children who do not know how to read, and how that equates to our juvenile delinquency rates as well as prison rates as well. So again, it's definitely a civil rights issue, and talking about a system that also needs severe change, the New York City Department of Education is right up there with NYPD.
Yes.
And I am also part of an educational organization where we're poised to do something. And when I say something, I'm talking about mandating legislative change for everyone. So I would definitely like to have a conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
One more.
Is there any other questions? Someone else?
It's not a question. All of us in this room clearly care about this issue. And I've been doing this kind of social justice work since I was a kid when my mom taught at Merritt College, and she told Bobby and Huey, you boys better be careful when you go out there to form the Panthers. This issue affects all of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So if we do everything that we can to let other people know about this book and how an officer is challenging the system to correct it, more people will be on board with changing the system. And we all have our own personal missions.
Mm-hmm.
But this mission affects all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm imploring you to all of us, let's do what we can to let other people know about what's happening here, because we can change this. We can actually fix this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think, when you have a conversation with the professor, if you could invite me, because I'm with you. I want to figure out how do we develop a strategy to, when I sometimes feel hopeless in these conversations, right? When you're just like, the system's so big, people are trained to become these individuals that ultimately they didn't want to become.
Mm-hmm.
But if there was enough of us in a room really strategizing, really mapping out what can be possible, then I think we could get to the place that you're talking about, right? A community without policing, a community where our young people are thriving, where education is not an option, but it's, a right for every child to have. And so, again, I want to thank all of you for joining us. I want to thank our readers for being phenomenal. Steve, my son, and Felicia. We hope you continue to support the Gathering for Justice and stay up to date on our work. Follow us on Instagram at gather4justice, as well as X, formerly known Twitter, at gather4justice. And if you would like to make a donation, we accept donations. Goldie right here. Our work is supported by the people, for the people. So, whatever we do is we actually put things on our credit card. So we would love for you to make a donation. Visit our website, Gathering for Justice, not for FOR, justice.org. And we provide all our programming for free to our community, and we love for continue to do that. I also want to give a shout out to everybody who's online. Major shout out to all of you who tuned in, and the biggest shout out is to you. I want to thank you for being vulnerable. I want to also thank you for giving us like a new vision of what is possible. So love you, and I always appreciate you. All right, everyone. Books are over here. Wine is over here. Let's get it cracking.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Oh, team's back. So that's when she's ready.
What do you mean?
I heard